again. Hope everyone enjoyed lunch.
Hi, guys.
Thank you so much to Stephanie and Kevin for joining us. We're very happy to have you.
Happy to
If you haven't spent a lot of time in Chicago, you might not be familiar with all of the amazing Boca Group restaurants, so I highly recommend them. Since becoming the first female top chef nearly a decade ago, Chef Stephanie Izard has also added the title Iron Chef to her biography. She currently runs 3 restaurants in Chicago, including Little Goat Diner, which I have to say is a Skift Table staff favorite. We were just there a couple months ago.
For the record, don't compete against Stephanie Izard on TV in a cooking competition. You will lose.
Kevin and his partner, Rob Katz, founded Boca almost 15 years ago. It's about to turn 15.
You know what? 17 years ago, actually. Yeah, Boca's been open for 15, but
Got it. Oh, the
took us
restaurant
a while,
is 15.
so yeah.
I understand, the group. Okay, great. So you opened your first restaurant together 8 years ago, Girl and the Goat. It was your first restaurant, Stephanie, and Boca's 4th restaurant?
That's right, yeah.
Now Boca has 19, and you have 3, Stephanie in Chicago, with another on the way that I'll talk about in a minute. But I want to start by asking both of you, what is different in the beginning of a partnership like yours, and after so many years of working together, how does the day-to-day change?
Do you want to go first?
I'll go first, sure. Yeah, you listen.
Let's hear what he says, and I'll comment.
Yeah. See if you agree with me or not. Well, first of all, going back to that time, I think it was probably 10 years ago when we started kind of the journey of looking. Like Stephanie, literally, she won on TV, and I think the next morning we met for coffee.
Yeah, I met Rob and Kevin at Boca after I had done well in the beginning of the season, but we hadn't filmed the finale yet, so
yes.
They didn't know. I didn't even know if I was going to win or not. But I met them at Boca, and they're both, look at Kevin, very well dressed, kind of like these gentlemen who came over to the table. I was like, who are these guys? And they're like, do you want to go have a drink next door? And I was like, well, yes, I do. So my friend Jesse and I, who owns Black Dog Gelato, it's true. So we all went next door and had a drink, and that's when the conversation got started. But I didn't know if I wanted to be part of a restaurant group, because I actually had owned my own restaurant by myself prior to that for a few years. So I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that or not. And then I kind of said no, and then after I won, then I came back to you guys. I was like, this would be a much smarter way to go.
Yeah, so it's interesting, the landscape at that point, and she won, and so we kind of wanted to carry that momentum, but it actually took a while.
It took 2 years.
If you remember what was happening at that point, the world was collapsing. So I think, we were trying to go out, raise money, and, back in those days, we had 4 investors, and 2 of those investors worked at Bear Stearns. So we had to go out, and this was a much bigger project. And I remember the first 10 people that we asked to invest in Girl and the Goat said no. I run into a lot of those 10 people these days. Girl and the Goat's one of the great restaurant investments of all time. So they come now and they go, God, I was an idiot. But that point in time, I think for Stephanie's mindset and both mine, there was a tremendous amount of pressure on both of us. I think Stephanie you can correct me if I'm wrong, was out to prove, yes, I was on a reality show and I won it, but the foundation of me is I'm a great chef. I'm not just somebody who won a TV show. And she was wanting to open to quickly erase that, so when people came in and tasted her food, that wouldn't be the first line you'd see in her bio anymore. First line would be Stephanie Izard, chef owner of this restaurant. And for us, we were a young company, and it just felt like there was so much pre-press to this restaurant that there wasn't a lot of room for error. So I think we were all pretty nervous.
I think that this is the story I always tell, maybe I made it up in my head, but that you said to me, we don't want the headline in the newspaper to be Top Chef ? After we opened, and I was like, well, I don't want that to be either. And I remember the day that the first, so to get back to your question of how it was then and how it is now, I think back then, I remember the day that our first review came out, and I was inside the restaurant reading, and Kevin pulled up in his car really quickly and ran into the restaurant. We read it together and literally were both crying. So it was such a very well-written, just we had done it. We had, when you get that first review and people actually get what you were going for. And now it's our lives, Kevin has how many restaurants?
19.
19. And I'm busy enough with 3, so I don't know. I don't understand this. But I think that we both have so many different projects going on that the level, we trusted each other very much then to be able to get into a relationship, and trusting your partners is the most important step in choosing partners they always say it's like you're getting in bed with someone. It's even beyond that. And I think that now our level of trust is like just as strong, if not stronger, but in a different way, where we trust that we're both having the best interest at heart for the restaurants that we have, without having to necessarily meet every day and talk about it. And even with like new projects that we're working on, we know that we both are working on them simultaneously. So I think the trust level has to increase over time.
So trust is the foundation of a solid partnership.
I think so.
I think it starts with that. I think one of the other things, though, it's much different than a romantic relationship. You know, a romantic relationship, they say that opposites attract. It doesn't work with business partnerships. You have to agree most of the time. I think a lot of times when you put two people together and you know there's someone who's more on the creative side and there's someone who's more on the business side, if anyone is too far to one side, that doesn't work. And my goal as a restaurateur is to meet at this kind of perfect intersection of financial responsibility and artistry. And the way I started in this business was when I opened my first little 6-table restaurant with my girlfriend 26 years ago, all I cared about was putting out a great product. I was 99% artist and 1% businessman. And so I think these relationships only work when it's not someone who's too much of a businessman, you know? That they still have to approach it from an artistry side too. And so I think that's why we get along.
Great. So your next project together is Girl and the Goat in Los Angeles. Congratulations. It'll open next summer, correct?
Yeah, next June.
Great. That's super exciting. It's your first restaurant outside of Chicago, both of you?
Yeah.
Not my first outside of Chicago.
But
I had 4, but with Boca, yeah.
Okay. So that was clearly a decision you made together, deciding to go to LA. Who came to who with that idea?
I think, Rob and Kevin, I think, get approached all the time about doing restaurants outside of Chicago, and I might get approached about doing restaurants separately with other groups and such. And it's really just, it was until Rob and Kevin found an idea that I think that they thought was a good fit and then brought it to me. We had actually gone to a couple other markets and looked first, and it just didn't feel exactly right. And I think to make that big leap, because we're so hands-on in the restaurants, that making that first step to going outside of the city had to feel just right and feel like the right neighborhood. It took us 2 years to find over a year to find the Girl and the Goat space in Chicago. So finding that right city was adding on it, another layer of it, just feeling like the right fit.
We've looked at a lot of cities over the years. We always wanted to do something outside of Chicago at some point. We were looking for perfect city, perfect time, and preferably somewhere warmer than Chicago.
I was going to ask about that, the proximity to the beach.
It was a small factor. It became more important as time
I joke
went on.
that my 2-year-old looks like he lives on the beach, so I was like, we need to move him to California for at least part of the year. So here we go.
Is that your plan then, to spend a significant amount of time?
Yeah, I think, I never want the restaurants in Chicago to feel like I'm abandoning them and going to the beach and being going surfing. But I also am not going to open a restaurant outside of the city and not spend a lot of time there. So we're looking at apartments right now, and we'll definitely do a 2-city thing. Hopefully it'll make Ernie a better person for all of that. We'll see.
I think part of going to LA, I think there's some of it makes me kind of feel like a little kid again, because you're going into a market that you don't know, and I think a lot of it will be like me and Steph and Rob going out there together and learning a new city together. Kind of brings it back to the beginning, which I'm pretty excited about. And when you go to another city, I think it's really important to show that city a lot of respect when you go in there and learn the city before you start talking about it. And so right now, that's just getting to know Los Angeles and showing it as proper respect. And I think we're both going to be in LA a lot next year.
What does proper respect mean? Can you just elaborate on some of the specific things that you're doing?
I'll give you an example of how people have not done well in Chicago. If you go to a city and you immediately say, "Hey, I'm going to show this town how to do sushi," there's no, and people have done and said these kind of things before, and I think you just got to go in, be humble, and let your work kind of speak for you. Understand the culture, get to know the people in the town, go eat at other restaurants, try to be part of the community before you start, saying I'm awesome.
And what does it mean for a chef to become part of a new city, a new community?
I think it was important to me to go to a city where I do have a number of chef friends already, and I think luckily through some of the TV things I've done, I've met a lot of people all over the country, and it is just a really, close group of people that are happy to share. Where do they get their meats from? How do I connect with the farmers market there, which is so huge in California? Where do we get our linens from? How do you decide how much you're going to pay your cooks here? So I think that luckily the chef friends that I have there, I've already reached out and plan on, I'm going to take them all to their favorite restaurant there so I can get to know more restaurants there and dig out as much info from them as possible. I'll give them some drinks and see what they'll share. But I think it's really important to have a support staff, because in Chicago right now, if I run out of onions one day, I can text Paul Kahn down the street in his restaurants and go borrow some onions. I need to have that feeling of support in another city so I don't just feel like sort of this little scapegoat. Oh, scapegoat.
Hey.
It's just how goats are everywhere.
Yes.
No, it's great. It's great.
But you're right. We will be on a little bit of an island. It's it's hard to go that far away and be only there's 19 Boca Group restaurants in Chicago and there's only one of these in Los Angeles. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah. How was your process for opening the new restaurant maybe different than opening your first restaurant together? I heard you a little bit in the green room talking serious logistics, and it's fascinating. But it's fascinating, and California is a very different labor market than Chicago, just because of laws and regulations and things that are different. So I'm just curious, I'm sure that it feels a little bit nostalgic to open, a brand new place in a brand new city, as you did 10 years ago or 8 years ago. But how is it different than the first time?
I mean, I think every time you open a restaurant, I think the reason that now so many people do open multiples is there's this very huge excitement in trying to find out all these things and solve all of these problems. And I always get excited about new projects, and then I forget that then you have to actually operate that for many years to come. It's not just the excitement of, yes, we did a new restaurant. You have to figure out how it's going to be, the longevity is going to be there. But I think with Kevin and Rob are still learning some of the things that they're going to share with me on numbers and how it works in California. Whereas when we opened in Chicago, they already had restaurants there, and I had my own restaurant there, so we understood the lay of the land. So that's the biggest part of it, is we're all kind of trying to learn these things at the same time, rather than me just strictly learning just from you guys. You're still learning too.
Here's the really good news is over the course of being in Chicago for 17 years, we've built a ton of infrastructure. After we opened up Girl on the Goat, we opened up 7 restaurants in 3 years, and our corporate office was 3 people. And I remember at the end of that process, right before we opened up Little Goat, I was right on the edge of having a nervous breakdown. And I remember putting my hands on Rob's shoulders and saying, "What are we doing to ourselves?" And since then, now the corporate team is about 40 people. And so we have this incredible infrastructure. We've understood the model. We understand Chicago so well, and we said, I've got a great idea. Let's go someplace where we completely don't understand, that has totally different labor laws, and start over again. And that's basically what's happening, because who has the hardest labor laws in the entire country? California. There's no tip credit out there, which means instead of servers making $5.95 an hour like they do in Chicago, they make $16.25 an hour. Overtime is compiled daily. If you work more than 8 hours, then overtime. So there's all these tricky little laws that you have to navigate, and we obviously love a challenge. So we're like, great, bring it on, let's do it. So it's going to be interesting. So I think we have a lot more infrastructure, so I think we can execute a plan faster. We have this critical path that is the 750 things you have to do to open up a restaurant. And we go down this list very systematically. And
would you say our meeting was systematic going through that list? When we had our first meeting, we had this list in front of us, and 2 of us start talking about this part of the list, and the other 2 people are excited to talk about the other part of the list, and then we're like, all right, where are we on this list? Are we on number 630? Okay, let's all get back together. But yes, everybody has their different parts that they're so excited to start exploring and sort of solving these problems, which is great, because you have to divide and conquer a little bit while still being on the same team.
That's right.
Is it really 750 points?
It's something like that, yeah.
I got lost after definitely 680, I think.
Yeah,
it's a long way to make it. Good job.
Yeah, it's very granular. So the smallest of things to open up a restaurant, but
what forks are we going to have?
Yes, that's right.
Which is the best part, is picking out all that stuff.
Yeah, it's your favorite?
Yes, it's so fun. I love picking out the flatware and the plates and all that stuff. And we've learned from Girl on the Goat that where we break way too many plates every month. From the hustle and bustle, that those decisions have a huge impact. Every little decision, every one of those 700 points makes a huge impact.
Certain chefs have worse china addictions than others.
Luckily for you, like I don't usually go very expensive. We just
It's not Stephanie.
Yeah, no,
it's not Stephanie. I wish I could say the same for Lee Wolin and Jimmy Papadopoulos.
Well, I was going to ask you to name names, so
I did. Yeah, there you
thanks
go.
for volunteering that. Your restaurant's been open for 8 years, as I've said. Do you change the plates and the flatware? Do you think about how often do you have to change something like that?
We've actually had the same flatware the whole time. I feel like we should do an update, but when you look at the P&L and you think, all right, now we're going to get all new flatware for this restaurant that does X number, like how much flatware that is. We're like, well, this stuff is great.
That question just cost us like $10,000.
Yeah, I know.
Thanks a lot.
You know how you've implanted that in my head? I'm like,
Change the flatware. That's a great idea, Kristen.
I think that Girl and the Goat, the way that it's set up, we decided to go the route of it's not precious in the plate style. It's all sort of a hodgepodge. So we can kind of just like change our mind every week and be like, let's try these. And it kind of just fits into the mold. I think that's sort of the fun of having a restaurant that's, a little bit more fine dining, but is definitely still casual and kind of eclectic. So we can just do whatever we want with the plates.
One of Stephanie's special skills is that she never gets complacent about anything, and she really loves change. So she's constantly trying to improve on things in the restaurants, which is one of the reasons, and we were saying this backstage, Girl and the Goat has gone up in sales every year for 8 straight years. This is a restaurant that the day that it opened was booked 3 months in advance, and it's been that way the whole time. And I think a lot of that is because Steph, A, never rests on her laurels, but B, she's also the hardest working girl in show business. If you ever go to Chicago sometime and drive around the West Loop, there's a pretty good chance you're going to see her with something over her head walking across the street like Frogger to try to get from Girl and the Goat to Little Goat. It's just gotten harder over the years.
It has gotten harder. There's too much traffic there now. It's very dangerous.
Careful. So I think you're both obviously very down-to-earth people. You have a great working relationship, but you're also 2 pretty big names in your fields. You both have a lot of responsibility. I'm curious how that, I guess we'll call it ego management, works when you're collaborating on a new project with so much external responsibility for all of the other projects that you each have going on. I guess, how do you find the time for each other and for your combined projects and still honor your external responsibilities?
You know what, Steph, I would say that when her and I have to sit down and talk about something, when we've not been able to navigate it through other channels, it's something that's really important. And I think what's changed is that, spirited conversations are fine. I have a lot of spirited conversations. Some people might call them arguments, with people sitting at a table because we take this so seriously. And I think when we were first opening up the restaurant, because we were feeling that pressure, sometimes we would sit at a table and the conversations would get really spirited. I think we still have that same sort of emotion and passion, but I think we can sit across from each other now and navigate our way through a problem in a much more muted sense, don't you think?
I think that I learned after, when we opened Girl and the Goat, I remember the walk-ins like broken down one day and I screamed, I was like, you expect me to have one of the most successful restaurants in Chicago? I can't have an effing walk-in that works? And I was like freaking out. I can definitely remember that day.
Yeah. How was I? Did I yell back?
No, you're like, we'll get it fixed. It'll be great. I'm just kidding. I will say, like sometimes when you call, I think to myself, I'm like, oh God, did I do something? But nowadays, it's always positive.
Yes.
But I think I've learned over the years, and I feel like you might have said something to me once that made me think, you have to like kind of choose your battles and the things that you're really gonna push for. So like, if Rob and Kevin, if we're going to LA and they're like, really want this like specific glass for this specific drink and I just don't like that glass, am I gonna pick that? I'd rather win the war over the plates than over this one glass. So just kind of choosing which part of, when we're doing the design process right now, I brought up the one thing I was like, we just need more bathrooms. And luckily we were all on the same page, but the designer I think was like, there's no room for more bathrooms. We're like, I really don't want to have a line. There has to be more than like 3 bathrooms.
Let's annex more space.
Yeah. So I think we're more on the same side of the argument more often than not. But also I think that for me, I've had to really, I try my best to think about it a little bit more before getting heated and just think, is this that? What is the most important thing to really push for? What's really going to like make me more proud of the restaurant or really, the way that I want it to be, and choose my battles and then just try not to make it a fun conversation as opposed to just kind of losing it.
Rob and I had one rule when we started our partnership, and we sat down 17 years ago and said, nobody ever digs their heels in. You can give a spirited argument for what you want. You could say, I really appreciate if you let me have this one, I'll let you have the next one. But it's never line in the sand. this is what we're doing or else. And so we've never had that conversation. I think that's the key to longevity.
Great. Cool. I'm going to go to a couple of audience questions. And I like this one because we were just talking about this. What is the story behind the girl and the goat's name?
So my last name in French is Izard, and it's a mountain goat that lives in the Pyrenees Mountains. And I found that out just a few years before we opened Girl and the Goat. My first restaurant was called Scylla, S-C-Y-L-L-A, and nobody pronounced it right. And it turned out it was this super evil sea monster that the word is sort of synonymous with B-I-T-C-H, which I had no idea. So when I found out my last name was a type of goat, I was like, what a fun name that would be. And everybody can pronounce goat, I hope. And originally it was going to be the drunken goat, because back in my, I guess I was my early 30s. I still acted like I was in my 20s, and I kind of was the drunken goat. And then the woman that owns the Drunken Goat Cheese, at first she was like, oh, that's cool. And then her lawyers were like, that's not cool. So we had to, I was like, well, I don't know what other word to describe myself. How are we going to call it the blank goat? And a friend of mine did a painting. Now there's a bigger version in the dining room, the smaller one's in our underground goat, which is our private dining room, but of a girl and a goat and these dancing beer cans. And eventually after we saw that painting for a while, it was like, what about girl and the goat? But sometimes we still get deliveries from like certain fish companies where it says girl on the goat. And I'm like, that's a completely different concept. I don't know if we're going to go there.
There is a long thread of text between Stephanie, I could probably find him from way back when, to where every morning we were all waking up because we couldn't use the drunken goat. It would be like, how about toasted goat?
Yeah, how about this goat, that goat? Like everything.
Yeah.
Cool. It's a great story. Yeah. I didn't know that until 20 minutes ago. Cool. In choosing where to land, a new city, new culinary, new design risk, how much does gut instinct play a part? I would say, especially now with everything, your experience and all you know.
I think gut instinct plays a huge part after you have actually had some successes. I think you question yourself to death when you start out in this business. I think once you start trusting your gut, which I think we're both pretty good at this point, is it just feels right or it doesn't feel right. I went to a couple cities when we were looking at other cities, and to me, there just wasn't enough of a culture of hospitality in those cities. And I think that was just a gut instinct thing where I felt, I don't think hospitality is valued enough in X city for us to go there. And so Los Angeles in the last 5, 6, 7 years has had a huge proliferation of great chefs, great restaurants opening up, and it just feels good there right now. So I think that was a gut thing.
And
I've always just gone with my gut, and I think it was since getting with Rob and Kevin that I learned that you should actually think about things and look at the finances first. When we were looking for restaurant spaces, I remember we looked at one in Logan. I was like, I love it. Let's do it. This is great. And then Rob's like, maybe we should ask about the electric and see if it has enough to actually sustain a restaurant. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, good questions. Yeah. So I've always just gone like a little bit more of a gut instinct in life in general. And luckily, these guys are a little bit smarter to trust that, but also look into it a little more.
Yeah. That sounds like a great partnership. I mean, that's what must be behind a lot of the success, I would say, is one person being able to think and anticipate what the other person might not necessarily see. All right, last question. How will you maintain the culture of what makes you great in Chicago when you open in Los Angeles?
It says when you open on the island of LA.
Yeah,
it sounds even scarier when you read the full question.
You know, yeah, seriously. You know, we train a little bit differently, I think, than most people do. One of my favorite things that we do is we do mock service for a week. We do a table. The table, usually sitting at that table is, you know, myself, Stephanie, maybe the GM, Director of Operations, sitting at that table. And every single person in the front of the house has to get up and wait on us in their theater voice while everybody sits around and wait on us, and this goes on for a week. And we kind of build the language of the restaurant, the culture of the restaurant, and no, don't say signature, that's stupid, that sounds like Applebee's, whatever, you know, all those little things. And in that training, which is about 30 days, we're gonna approach it in LA the same way we approach it in Chicago. And I think we spend enough time with those people, 8 hours a day for 30 days, to figure out who they are. So when we open, we've got the right people around us. To me, hiring is not about technical skill. It's about, do I like you and do I think you're smart? I do weird interviews. Stephanie will tell you, like, I'll be like, hey, what'd you have for breakfast today, Winston? And he'll be like, oatmeal. And so I'm like, well, did you make it? Did you buy it somewhere? I just want to have a conversation with somebody and say, hey, can you keep up with me? And through that conversation, who are you? Are you charming? Are you smart? How are you going to be with someone? All the other stuff, I can teach you how to hold a plate, but I can't teach you how to be a good person. So we're going to look for great people who are passionate about what we do, and we're going to believe in our own teaching skill. And we're going to try to, build a team up that wants to jump in a foxhole with us, because that's the mentality when you open up a restaurant. This is going to be really difficult. And, I tell a speech at the opening of all the restaurants, and I'm like, this is going to be really hard. If you're looking for the easy road, it's a whole bunch of restaurants that you can make a whole lot of money at down the street. This is the hard road. But I promise you on the other side of it, there'll be redemption and there'll be greatness, and you'll appreciate it. And so that's kind of, and if they stick around, we lose people throughout that because they don't want that. There's attrition with that. But that's the people that stick around are the people that we want to go into battle with, and I think that's how we find a culture.
I think in the kitchen side of things and in front of the house, I think bringing some people from Chicago, but then finding great people in LA that are going to teach us the ways of LA is going to be key. I have a few members of the team in Chicago that already want to, who doesn't want to move to LA and get the sunshine? So they're really excited to come be part of the team. But if we brought all Chicago there, then we just wouldn't fit in. We wouldn't be able to figure it out. So we have to have this nice little marriage of LA-based folks and Chicago-based folks so that we can all kind of learn from each other and have all the LA managers and even some of maybe a small portion of the cooks come out to Chicago and spend a few months and see sort of what's happened in Chicago and how Girl on the Goat works. And then they can comment back and say, I don't know if that's going to work in LA or what's going to translate well. And that way, when we're all in LA together, we can reference things that we've done in the past and they'll kind of have an understanding of it.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here.
Thank you.